Excellent. And you should also have access to these slides now, I think. So I started said, okay, how many senses do we have? How many senses do we have?
5.
5 senses? Anybody, any other number? You've heard about it, like people say we have like a sixth sense or something like that. Intuition, okay. Any others? Okay. So I said yes, so we will look at, okay, if we have senses, like our eyes and our nose, our ears, how does information, get from the outside and for us to make sense of it? So we need receptors to be able to pick up the information. We'll talk about what kind of receptors, sensory receptors, to sense, to detect. How do we detect the sense of taste or smell? What is the anatomy of the eye? We'll focus more on the eye and the ear, and then we'll look at some of the abnormalities and solutions to some of these things. So I said, in terms of sensory receptors, how we sense things, I say it's almost like you could make it akin to us like having a phone tower that picks signals. So we have receptors, dendrites, specialized cells that pick up stimuli. And some of these receptors pick up external stimuli from our external environment. So we can call those like exteroreceptors, like the ones when we hear, when we see, when we taste stuff, is stuff that is coming out to us, as opposed to interoreceptors that receive stimuli from stuff happening within our body. Our blood pressure goes up. How do we know it is up? Our sugar level goes up. How do we know it is up? To ask it to make the insulin, more insulin to be produced. Our pH is high. Salt concentration is high. How do we make that we pee more? So we have receptors within us that sense conditions inside the body to be able to make our body respond appropriately, usually even to maintain homeostatic state, because we talked about the need for the body, the stuff going on in our body to have like the right pressure range, the right temperature range, the right pH range, the right concentration or salt concentration range. Because if conditions deviate too much from this range, acceptable range, we can get into trouble. Trouble meaning that we can get sick. So we have sensory receptors that are exterior receptors or interior receptors. And then we also have chemoreceptors that respond to nearby stimuli, like, if you look like pain receptors, a type of chemoreceptor that responds to chemicals when tissue is damaged. When you pour hot stuff on your body, you feel a sense of burn. And then sometime when the cells there are damaged because of the excess temperature, that burn now starts translating to pain. And then we talk about photoreceptors, photons, photoreceptors that respond to light waves. And you can imagine that those will be in our eyes. Mechanoreceptors that respond to forces or pressure. That probably could be on our skin. If somebody presses your skin, pinches your skin, you have different kinds of sensation there. And then we'll talk about thermoreceptors that respond to changes in temperature. Then I have this picture here that talk about the sensory cell types. Then here for photoreceptors, we're going to talk about it, the rods and the cones, the hearing. We have mechanoreceptors, and then the detection of pressure, mechanoreceptors, the ones of smell, chemoreceptors, taste, chemoreceptors. We'll talk about that a little bit more. And I put a table on the next slide here that kind of differentiates between the sensory receptor, the stimulus, the category, the sense, and the sense organ. For example, our taste buds, we have taste cells and then those are, when you put something in your mouth, you're having some kind of a taste sensed by taste cells within our taste buds. And it is those when I say chemical, it sounds like something bad. But remember that when you eat food, a spice or anything that you taste is a chemical. Olfactory cells that we have in our nostrils allow us to be able to sense or smell stuff. And then rod and cone cells that we find at the back of our eyes, as we're going to see. And then within our ear, we have an organ there that is able to, that has ears in it that we're going to look at, that makes us, when we have sound waves, those sound waves get transmitted into, we have mechanoreceptors that, because of the pressure that makes these hairs to move. One of the things that all of these receptors have in common is they pick up the information and they have to change that information to an action potential. Electrical waves. That action potential, which is where the nerve cell now that the nerve cell picks it up and takes it into our brain for interpretation. I put here as like example again of interoreceptors and sensing stuff within us. Now, I was talking about how sensation occurs. You have a sensory receptor respond to environmental stimuli. The nerve cells travels to the cerebral cortex, and then you make sense of what is going on. So it has stimulus, receptor picks it, impulses get transmitted along the nerve, it goes to the spinal cord and to the brain. We make sense out of it and then determine what it is, and then even make a decision of what to do about it. So I said proprietary receptors are receptors that kind of give you a sense of what is going on, what is involved, especially. So like mechanoreceptors are example of proprietary receptors. In a reflex act, for example, somebody taps your knee, information goes into your spinal cord. Because you tap your knee, this information that moves from this muscle. We have nerve cells that move that are from the more connecting the muscle. They'll go into your spinal cord, and then from your spinal cord, some of them will move to the brain. But if they need for your leg to move up right away, it would send from your spinal cord, it will go back to your muscle and make your muscle fibers to contract, and you jig your leg up instantly. Before you know that, somebody hit your kneecap with a hammer or something like that. So I was talking about our skin. Our skin is a very complex structure, and it makes us to be able to appreciate the different kinds of receptors that we have that sense any sensation from our environment. We have nerves that here, that dendrites that end here, that make us feel heat, temperature, or pain. And then we have some other receptors here that will allow us, when somebody's touching us, we can feel a sense of touch. And then we have others here that will have root hair. If somebody touches just the hair on our skin, you could feel like, oh, who is touching me? Even though they have not really touched your skin per se, but just the head itself, it would radiate from the root hair and now make you have a sense of what is going on. We have, so the skin, I was telling you that just applying pressure, soft touch, squeezing, it you could we just within a very small area within our skin could allow us to sense different kinds of sensation and know that no, this is from cold, this is from something that is hot. No, this is from somebody that is poking me. This is somebody that is squeezing my skin. This is somebody that is applying pressure on it at the same area. And our ability to do that is to be able to interpret or be aware of that is thanks to all of these nerve endings that end here, or from these receptors here, that when that sensation is, that pressure or that stimulus is applied, these nerve cells, there's a change that happens. There's an interface where these endings would pick that pressure and then convert it to action potentials, which is how we said information gain moves along a nerve cell, along a neuron. For taste receptors, I said sensitive to sweet, sour. If you imagine in your tongue, you could sense sweetness, you can sense sour, you can sense how salty or how bitter food is. It's thanks to the many taste buds that we have on our tongue. And when those taste buds get stimulated by different chemicals, or they have a combination of creating action potential that move along the nerves and goes and integrates these different stimuli to be able to make sense whether, oh, this is something that is sweet, this is something that is bitter. And it's also similar to in our nose trills, as we're going to talk about. In our nose, we have receptors, that olfactory receptors there in our nostrils, that will also have chemicals. When you go sniff like a perfume or a rose flower, for example, there are these chemicals, that molecules that move in the air, that go to these olfactory cells inside your nose, and it again, they get activated to convert this into an action potential that go to the right place of the brain to interpret it, to see whether how. So this it tests. Sometimes people say, oh, this is a sweet smell, or this flower tastes sweet or smells sweet, but it is this variety of various receptors that we have that allow us to be able to differentiate how we are able to sense our environment. I was talking about it. So we have here, these receptors are right here. Molecules, other molecules will move from here, they will hit them, and then they get converted into an action potential. They go into our brain, and that is where we make sense of what is, how the smell is. This smells like a foul smell. This smells like a very nice smell. So we have many of them. And as I indicated, the one that we're going to look at more, trying to understand more, is the eye and the ear. How many people have gone and done an eye exam before? Anybody? Eye exam? So if you look at the structure of our eye, we have an eyeball, and if you slice this across, it's going to look something like this. We have a lens, we have an area where light comes through, we have liquid in the front, we have liquid in the back, and then we have, so if the goal of the eye is to be able to make us see, the question is, how do we see things? We know typically light will come from the outside, and then it passes through the lens, and then it creates an image that is picked up in the back of our eye. There is a nerve cell here at the end called the optic nerves that will take that image created and change it to an action potential that would take it to the brain, the right place of the brain to make sense of what it is. So what do I expect you to know here? We have to be able to at least remember the parts. I said the pupil is that opening that allows light to come through. We have the iris, the one that controls how wide you open your eyes and how whether you want to narrow the pupils to make sure that only a small amount of light is coming in. And then the cornea is that bulky part on the front of your eyeball, below which we have a liquid called the vitreous aqueous humor. Then we have these ciliary muscles, sometimes they'll call them ciliary body or ciliary muscles. They allow you to be able to to contract, to pull this apart, and then they'll make so, and then these ligaments, these suspensory ligaments that are holding the lens, unlike the lens of your glasses, this lens is a little bit much more pliable, especially when you are young. When you start getting old, it gets a little bit much more rigid. It allows it to be able to stretch. So you could make this lens, these ciliary muscles can make these ligaments to, when they contract, it will pull the lens and stretch it to be not as fat, but to make it a little bit more stretchy. And when it does that, it changes where the light focuses here. So you notice sometimes if you cannot see something and then you squint a little bit, then you're able to see the thing. That squinting that you are doing is causing this lens to be able to stretch or to be in the right size to attempt to focus the light to hit this back of your eye where the image is supposed to be captured. If you look in terms of the sides of the eye, they have the walls of the eye, they have like 3 layers. The sclera is the outer layer, the choroid is the middle one, the retina is the one that where we have those cells that pick up the light stimulation to create the image are located. I mentioned earlier that there are 2 kinds of cells here. We have the rod cells that are located more out this way, the rod cells that are located in the periphery here of the retina. And then in this area that is called fovea centralis, we have the cones that are located here. The rod cells that are located on this outside here, they would account for us to be able to see things under very low light conditions, things that we see them, things that are in black and white. But the cones here allow us to be able to see things that are in color and in more distinct, refined contrast color. I put on this side here to some functions of these parts. We'll go a little bit more but I wanted to talk a little bit more here. So I said on the sclera, its function is to protect and support the eyeball, and then the cornea, its job is to refract light. To reflect light is when the light waves hit something, then they bounce off and go in another direction. To refract light is when the light waves hit that material, it bends the light. It doesn't make it reflect to push it out instead, but it bends the light. So the function of the cornea is to help to refract refract light. The goal is to be able to make sure that more light come here and is bent so that it focuses the image in the back of our eye. I said the pupil, this part here, this opening here, admits light. And when I'm talking to you, you are seeing my image is because you are the light that is coming from my head, and then from the half part that you see, it is coming through this pupil. And the funny thing, as you're going to see, is that the image would be inverted here. Like my head, if there was like an image being created of me behind here as you're looking at me, my head will be this way, then my belly side will be my shoulders will be up down this way. But in your brain, you don't see me like that, because when that image goes through an action potential through this optic nerve, your brain is able to interpret and reorient the picture for you to see me the way you are seeing me now. I said the ciliary body holds in place and accommodates. Accommodation is to make sure that it adjusts, to make sure that enough light comes in for you to be able to see what they are saying. Then the retina contains the sensory receptors. Rod cells make black and white vision possible. Meanwhile, the cone cells make the color light possible. The fovea centralis here, I said its job here it is where the most of these cones are located, and it makes you to be able to see things in more precise, accurate vision. The lens again, so if you look at this one refracts, the lens refracts, bending the light to make sure that it focuses properly where it should be. And you're going to see, we're going to look at situations where the lens is not working well, means that it's not refracting the light properly. And you will see that the image sometimes will not focus right on this back here where it's supposed to focus. And then you would also see here that there is a nerve, there are some blood vessels being supplied to the eye here. And this area that has blood vessels and this other area here that has the nerve cells, they kind of call this area here blind spot, because it doesn't have those cells to pick up image. So let's just wind down and go to the next more expansive slides. I show you the same thing here. All what I've just been explaining, I put them here in notes for you to be able to see. Again, explaining all what each part does, which is what I expect you to know. And then I mentioned that how the light comes in, light rays come in, they get bent. I was talking about the lights that you're looking at something from the top, and then the bottom of the thing, the top becomes when it focuses here, the top will be here, the lower side will be up this way. And then I was also mentioning that the retina, which is this part here, that has these sensory cells, the rods and the cones, and how do they look like there? So if I don't want you don't have to know the details about this, but in terms of their structure and all of this, but I want you to know that we have these photocells called rods and cones. The rods basically would account for us being able to see things in poor light conditions, black and white, and then the cones are responsible for us to see things in color. And I said the area here where we have these optic nerves, it lacks these rods and cones, and we call that a blind spot. And before I just kind of push from here, there's a lot of reactions that would happen here where the light signal will go and have some chemical reaction happening to the cells here to make sure that that chemical reaction, like rhodopsin, gets changed. So, and then that creates the action potential. But for our purposes, I just want you to know that these two cell receptor types, rods and cones, when they get stimulated, they would go now and make these create action potential in the on the optic nerve, which is what carries. And when I say optic nerve, right, remember, we have nerves and neurons, right? So this is a sensory neuron that we said an action potential, which is the way I said, it's almost like somebody making waves like that, is created there to transmit that signal to the right location in your brain for interpretation. And just again, if you look when they say we have what we see is light, and we know that light, you've heard something called the electromagnetic spectrum, where which stands from, which in some way in between we have like light rays, and then sometimes we'll see radio waves on one side and then UV light on the other side. But we are talking now about this this section that deals with light. And when those light rays come through, we have those rods and the cones that are responsible for capturing it. And I mentioned that the rods allow us to not be able to see. When things are in very low light conditions, that is what helps us to see. The cones, again, which allow us to see color, and the color, they kind of grouped into red, green, and blue. And then within that spectrum, we can see light that is of that different color, and then it kind of blends to form a blend when like you mixing red and green and blue to be able to have a different color. That's why we can see a stretch, not like red, green, and blue, but we're able to see gradients of that pigment. And we also I should mention here that when they say, oh, eat vitamin A to make your sight better, your vision better, is because it is important for the proper functioning of these rods. And then here are some abnormalities of what we sometimes experience. Some people cannot see color, and usually color is, you see color because it's located. To be able to see color, there's a gene that allows us to be able to do that. It's located on our X chromosomes, meaning that it's located on the X chromosome of our sex chromosomes. So guys have one X chromosome and a Y chromosome in the chromosomes that determine their gender, and then female have two X chromosomes. So in these X chromosomes, sometimes guys have a mutation in that gene, and then they are unable to see things in color. So guys are more likely to be colorblind than females. Why? Because if females have one of their X chromosomes, the genes on it for color get messed up, the other one might be okay, and then they will still be able to see color. Now, if you look on this side, on the right side here, so if you see this, the goal of any light is to make sure that the light gets focused on the retina at the back here, on the retina at the back here, on the retina at the back here. But the unfortunate part is that all our eyeballs are not the same. Most people have eyeballs that would look like this, where the light will actually focus on the retina properly. But should your eyeball be such that it's round, where the light does not really, or the lens might be messed up, the eyeball shape could be messed up, or the lens itself can be messed up to make that the light doesn't focus on the retina as it should. So you could, when you go and do an eye exam, they could determine where the retina is actually, where the light is focusing. If it focuses short before it reaches the retina, they would need to put some kind of a lens, a corrective lens here that would make sure that it makes these rays to not be bent too much, but that should be bent that by the time they focus, they should be focusing right at the back here on the retina where it should be. So they'll put a corrective lens like this, a concave lens, so that it will make the light to focus where it should be. And then sometimes if you have your lens, the lens on your eye is kind of stretchy, it's not round, it would make the light stretch a little bit longer to focus, almost like if it was going to focus, it would pass the retina to focus. It's not that it actually passes here. They're just saying imaginarily, without the proper correction, the lens would focus way in the back of your eye. But without the lens, you will see that the lens is not focused, the light is not focused here. So you would see the images blurry. So what they will do is they will give you a convex lens. They will give you a convex lens to make it focus on the right spot. So you hear like nearsightedness, farsightedness, and the corrective lenses that they would give you, a doctor will give you to be able to correct the situation. And then sometimes some people have lenses that are, their lens is uneven. That means it's not smoothly round. It might have some kind of dips in there. So instead of even focusing the light directly here, the light will be bent and will be focusing in some other direction. So they would give you a corrective lens that factors where they have the unevenness of the lens, so that you can see the light rays can be bent properly to hit the retina where they should be hitting. In this situation where you have uneven lens or cornea, you could have a condition called astigmatism, and then at the other ones you have nearsightedness and farsightedness. And then sometimes you would have a situation where you have too much liquid in here, and then it builds pressure on there. And when it builds pressure, you have the condition they'll say glaucoma. And then when your lens is not smooth enough, it's almost like you are looking at your glasses that are not white. Then things become cloudy. Then they have ways now that they could go and they would laser smooth your lens, then to make it even. So the good thing about most of these eye conditions today is that they can actually make solutions for you to be able to see better, which is a great thing. How many of you use lenses or wear glasses or contact lenses, anything like that? Anybody? Evelyn, okay. Are you nearsighted, farsighted, or what kind of eye issue condition do you have?
I have a hard time seeing from like words far away.
Okay,
Mm-hmm.
so you're nearsighted.
Yes.
Anybody else? Okay,
I'm also nearsighted
yeah,
and I have an astigmatism.
okay. So you and I have the same issue. So, and the thing is that and there are certain things that could make our eyes conditioned to some of these things. They are genetically the way they are, and some of them, some activities like when you use when we use a screen a lot without the right filters, it could also mess up our vision. Since I started doing work using the screen a lot, my eye issues have exacerbated. Yeah. So, but it is a good thing is that they can easily be fixed. Does anyone have any question regarding the eye or anything that we have talked up to this point?
I had a question about our taste buds and our sense of taste.
Mhm.
It said that it was like 80% or 90% of it was actually because of our sense of smell.
Yeah, because when you bring food in front of you or something, right? The remember we're talking about like when you smell a flower, we say those molecules or those molecules from the whatever you are smelling, it comes into your nose, right? It goes to those olfactory cells, and then a chemical synthesizes and then transmit this as an action potential. So when you bring food and then you are smelling it, some of those things go straight to your nose, and then they would smell it, and then they will have the same reaction that will go there to make you have that kind of a test. The same signaling that will allow you to be able to feel it like, oh, this tastes sweet and things like that.
Yeah, so people like I know some people who don't have like a real sense of smell, or it's like very, very weak. So does that mean that their sense of taste is also like less than normal?
No, then they will depend more on just what is on their tongue.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, they will depend more on what is on their tongue. And that is why sometimes when you get sick or you get a cold, you lose your sense of taste. You say, I don't taste food, I don't taste anything. Is because remember those olfactory cells in your nose,
Mm-hmm.
they kind of you have mucus and everything kind of messing up your ability for those molecules to go there and stick to them to be able to make sense of it.
Okay. Thank you.
Let's push forward to look at how we hear stuff. Let me ask you, can you how many people can take their headsets and not cover their ears? How many people put them not on their ears but on the sides of their head and are still able to hear sound? Who has ever tried that? Not earbuds, but the headsets, the headphones, and then you put them not directly on your ears, but right like on the bones on your ear here, and you're still able to hear. Or can you hear if you do that? Why is that, Patricia? Why? It vibrates off the bone, and that is what we're going to see. So let's look at the anatomy of the ear. You can take your ear, this is, I don't know, this is like the left side, the right side. Okay, you are looking at me. This is your right ear right here. The outside part here, we can call it the outer ear, which has this part that has the connective tissue called the pinna. And then you have your earlobe, we call it the earlobe sometimes. And then you have this hollow canal here called the auditory canal. At the end of this canal is like a sheet of membrane called the tympanic membrane or called the eardrum. So this part here we will say is the outer ear. And then next to that is what is called the middle ear, like the middle portion. And the reason they call it the middle portion is because it's separating different stuff that is more inside the ear. So let's look at what is in the middle section here, the middle ear. They have 3 bones. The first one here called the malleus is kind of connected. It's almost like you have this membrane and you have this bone here that is sticking to it. The malleus is sticking to this membrane. And then next to this one is called the incus. And then next, connecting the incus, next to the incus is the staple. So when sound waves come here, they make this membrane to vibrate. When it vibrates, because this bone is connected to the membrane, it causes this bone to vibrate. And then it also then causes this inner one to vibrate, making this other, the innermost one, to vibrate. If you look here, this membrane is attached to this bone here, and part of this bone is connected to this bone here. That's why if you put your headsets and stick them here, and there's enough sound waves that hit that bone here, you can still cause this one to vibrate and make vibration to come here. So all of these things are mechanical stuff. Now we have to say at the end of all of this process, for us to know what we are hearing, a nerve cell needs to pick up the signal, convert it to an action potential, take it to our brain for us to make sense of it. So it goes now, and then we go now to the inner section of our brain. The inner section of our brain has this thing that looks like a snail called the cochlea. It rounds up and then comes here, and then it has this structure here that bends. They have three of them that bend like this, bend like this. They're called the semicircular canals that are filled with fluid. And this part here called the cochlea, we'll look at it later. And you will also see that it is filled with fluid and also has hair-like structures in there. And then we have this one here called the vestibular nerve, which is connected to this portion here. And these semicircular canals, they're the things that would make us, when you rotate, when you move around, when you spin around, the liquid in here, normally this liquid is not totally filled up. When you spin around, this liquid would be moved disproportionately into different, like more might be here and then less on this one here. So that when you stand, the dizziness you feel sometimes, like you feel like falling, you want to walk straight, then you start bending in one side, is because these of the uneven distribution of this fluid while you were spinning. So what do I want you to remember here? For this part, know the parts of the outer ear, the middle ear, and the inner ear. Can I put them here? The inner, this is like looking at your left ear now. This inner portion here, I said, these semicircular canals, they help us for balance. And then the other thing that I did not point out this here is that there is, from our mouth here, region, there is something that will, when you yawn, okay, if you see this membrane here, it connects from the auditory canal or ear canal to this membrane. And then from our mouth here, there is a small connection here that connects to the inside part of our middle ear. What that does is that it makes the pressure that is the pressure from the pressure from the air outside on this side to be equal to the pressure of the air that is coming through your mouth on this membrane. When can you better appreciate this? If you are flying, for example, and you are taking off, then as you start, the plane is ascending at high altitude, the air pressure on this side is reducing, but meanwhile, the one inside your mouth here is increasing. So imagine that while you were boarding the plane, the pressure on this side of the membrane was the same. The pressure on this side of the membrane through your mouth is the same. But as the plane is ascending to 10,000 feet, the air pressure here starts reducing on this side, and then the air pressure on this side stays the same. And then you say, oh, my ears are blocked or something like that. But if you open your mouth, swallow, and all of those things, it equilibrates the pressure from this side to be equal to the one on this side. So in terms of description of what I just said, it's outlined here again. So I said the inner ear is important for what? Hearing and balance. The hearing part, I said, the steps, the middle ear vibrates and strikes the membrane of the oval window, causing fluid waves to move into the cochlea. So this region that is here, that is like this, if you go inside, there are hair-like structures that look like this. When this part here hits this one, it creates a liquid that is in here to make these hair-like structures here to bend in some kind of way. Depending on how they bend, at the end here, there is a cochlear nerves that would be able to detect how these are bending and generate an action potential that would take it to our brain. And then we have this one here, they call the vestibular canal here. So it makes us to be able to sense, gravitational equilibrium that we don't tip over. And then semicircular canals, I said, when somebody moves you around, you spin around, you are not really falling, but what it does is it makes you to lose your sense of balance. So you can stand in one place and I say, just be moving round and round. You are not automatically going to, gravity will still be pulling you downwards because of this vestibular canal here that is able to sense that. But meanwhile, as you are moving round and round, the fluid in the semicircular canals is going to be unevenly distributed. So after a while, when you stand and this fluid is not the same level at this one and this one, then it needs some time after you have stopped rotating for it to re-equilibrate itself. It is between that time after you have been going round and round and stand, when the fluid is not distributed equally, you want to move, you start bending or falling in the direction where there is more of the fluid. But after the fluid has redistributed again evenly, then you have a sense of balance and can walk straight. So again, they illustrated the bending of the hair in here again. I said the cochlea converts vibrations into nerve impulses. That is the greatest part that I just want you to know, because the cochlea here, when it hits on here, when this staples, these steps here hits this part here, it makes the fluid here to move and cause the hairs that are in here to bend, and this cochlea is connected to these nerves. Then depending, because when you hear me talk, the pitch, it goes like sound waves, you go like this, they create the action potential that just go up like this. When I shout, they go more the same, they don't go too high, they go a certain particular range, but they just go more rapidly. So the nature in which sound comes influences or determines how the hairs here bend, and how these hairs here bend and the frequency on which the vibration is happening will be picked up by these nerve cells to generate action potential that will be detected by your brain to be able to explain it as loud sound, low sound, deep sound, and all of those different variants. I think you can see this. I don't think this is playing. I tried to play it, but it didn't work well. So my kids use, how many of you use earbuds that you put in your ear? The beauty of earbuds is that they don't look very, you can listen to your music or you can hear your stuff from your device without disturbing anybody else. That's the beauty of it. Is there a downside to it though? I was talking about the beauty of it. Is there a downside to using earbuds and all of that? Anybody can guess what that could be?
I think I heard that if you listen to over 60% volume, then it can damage your ears.
Yes. So when you listen to it at very high volumes, you would lose the ability to pick up when you don't use them, to be able to pick up some of the small volumes that you used to be able to hear. So you can damage your ears over time. And that is why sometimes if you have a way to calibrate for kids, it is very beneficial for them if there is a way to dial and lock their the volume range on which they can, how far they could increase the volume on their headsets, if that is possible. So even for us, we could damage our ears, our hearing by using them at very loud, very loud conditions. And I just put this here that we stay in a. If you ever go like in a retreat somewhere where there is no noise, you could really pick up. You will see the difference between living there or living in the city. Because if you live in the city, you have a whole camouflage of different noises, and then sometimes they could cause what? When you could make you like irritable, or it can make you have anxiety, or you can make, if it's so noisy, sometimes you can't even focus. There I think in Atherton, Palo Alto, or something like that, you cannot use lawnmowers that are gas lawnmowers that make noise. You have to use the battery ones that are. So there are many cities now that are also looking at the loss of sleep, issues and related issues that emanate because of loss of sleep, anxiety. People get more irritable, and then they're trying to find out how to minimize noise pollution. If you cannot play music very loud in your car, because there are some people put music in their car to the point that when you stop with them at the stoplight, it sounds kind of cool, where they would play their music and you can hear the bass from the music, can make your stomach, even though you're sitting in the next car, to even vibrate. So and that makes you actually appreciate what damage that can be. Imagine that somebody parked their car next to yours, they are playing music inside their car, but you can feel the sound waves making your own body vibrate. So there are many issues that can be created as a result of this. They said loud noises above sound noises measured in decibels, above 85 decibels or crooning noise can damage the inner ear and make us to lose our ability to hear properly. The one thing that I did not mention about our ear is that we have ear, if you notice, there's earwax builds up in our ear somewhere here. Is it beneficial to remove all earwax from our ears, do you think?
Yes.
Okay, then why does it build up there to begin with? So it is great not to have earwax build up so much in our ears, but the earwax also serves a function that it traps certain bacteria or certain things from coming inside to damage our fragile eardrum. Because when this is damaged, when your tympanic membrane is damaged, it is very difficult. I don't know whether they have ever been able to repair it again. You lose a hearing. Because if you look at the contraption that is existing here, this bone connecting to the membrane, this membrane then bouncing off as the sound waves hit this one, it looks like a very delicate arrangement. And so when you break, and this one, if you use Q-tips to even try to move the wax in your ear, you got to be careful. I think innately, when you're using a Q-tip, you don't want anybody to be like on your right-hand side. If you're using the right-hand side to do it, so that by mistake they can push your hand. It's a very delicate thing to do. So we have earwax here that serves some kind of a purpose for us. But then like the hairs too in our nose, that serve a purpose for us, which would trap particulates from getting into our nostrils. And the earwax here kind of prevents anything to come and also try to mess up or infect our ear membrane, the tympanic membrane here, and mess it for us. So this is just a small overview, as you can see here, explaining to understand what happens here. If you're interested, you can play a video of this and actually see what happens. But for our purposes, We are more an overview to be able to see the parts that are involved in how we hear and how we see and how we smell and how we sense touch, how we sense things from our surrounding, internal and external surrounding. Okay, I'm going to stop here. Any question?
I have a quick question.
Sure.
I know sometimes both our ears over time can be damaged for like putting in earbuds or putting something at a high volume, but I have a family member that has an issue of where they have a hard time hearing from one specific ear and the other one's clearly fine. Wouldn't both of them be affected in the same way, or would it have to be like different? Like, what could be the cause of that? Just one of them having to be more messed up than the other one.
It's hard to tell because if whatever caused, so because there are two sides, you have two ears, right? So the membrane, whatever might have affected this particular membrane on the one side might not have equally been happening on the other side. And so it could be something with the membrane itself, or it could be something with the nerve connections that lead from that membrane, or even from the bones that are in that area. It is something that an audio, but they can easily detect and tell what is going on with each one. Now they have tools to be able to tell you exactly what is causing your hear loss. And I think it's ear loss, hearing loss, and being able to see are some of the things that we have improved a lot on to be able to solve. So you just take them to an audiologist to be able to determine what is happening to it, and then they would be able to, based on that, they should be able to create some solutions for it. I have a neighbor here who, my neighbor doesn't, you really need to have to almost like come to his face to talk to him for him to hear. And now that you actually even talked about that, about hearing loss, our sense of ability to, the way we capture what is happening around us. So, but to your situation again, to have the family member go checked up with a doctor and audiologist and let them tell exactly what is wrong. And I believe they would be able to make some recommendations for how they could either having a hearing device to amplify or to that will make the hearing from that ear be equal to the other one that is functioning properly and things like that. But to segue from the question you asked, I was trying to say that you notice that when you hear me speak, from what I hear and the movement of my lips and my facial expression, all those different signals that you get from my eyes, the way I look, my facial muscles, and my expressions, my hand gestures, you take all of those things, and all of those things again are taken. If it is sound gestures, your eyes would see them like action potential. They will go to certain parts in your brain. Your ears will pick the noise and change to action potential to go to certain parts of your brain. And together, we are able to make sense. So, like your brain kind of, integrates all of this and all of these things. I say, yes, he is saying this, and okay, this is what he is trying to say. And what happens if my hands were not moving? So you will just depend more on the sound I produce. Or if I had turned my camera off, you would be depending solely to make sense out of it, of what I'm saying, just from what you hear from your ear. So sometimes when people lose certain senses, some people usually say that, oh,
Yes.
yeah, the endocrine system. So two people view enter the room. It's just here now. So I mentioned earlier that our nervous system helps to enable communication between our body parts, and so that everything is very coordinated. Our endocrine system complements that ability for our body parts for information to be communicated in our body. By the time that we are done with this, I would like you to know what this endocrine system is composed of. And basically, which means it's a system that produces chemical messengers. They call them chemicals, which act like messengers, because those chemicals, they are carried and go and cause activity to happen in certain locations from where they are produced. We can compare the way those chemicals work. Some of the chemicals operate they would produce the chemicals and they act within the surrounding cells. Some of them, the chemicals are carried in the blood and they move to act in different parts of our body. So you hear like exocrine, endocrine glands. And then you hear the general characteristics of these chemicals. Some of them are steroids, some of them are peptides, means some of them are made of fatty acids, and then some of them are other made of amino acids. And then you should be able to also tell the different glands what they produce and whatever hormone they call them, those chemicals messengers are called hormones, what each of those hormone does. And then we'll kind of focus a little bit more on diabetes, which is the condition where we are not able to control the amount of blood sugar that we have properly. So I said both the endocrine system and the nervous systems both allow communication to happen in our body, within cells, within body parts, or even sometimes within individuals. In this case about the endocrine system, we are dealing with hormonal communication. I said the system is made of glands. That's a group of cells, tissues that would synthesize, and then secrete these chemicals. They call them chemical messengers, hormones, that would influence growth, development, or chemical activity. When they say metabolic activities, I've also referred that word metabolic activities in reference to just a way to say all the chemical reactions that are happening in our body, or the various ones. If you take a blanket way of referring to those, if you don't want to say this particular chemical reaction and this one, you just say the metabolic activities that are happening in our body. So these endocrine hormones actually go and affect almost every part of our body. They target specific cells. So if you look at what will make a particular hormone to act in cell A instead of cell B or cell C, is because the target cell that should have some kind of a receptor. Just imagine that the cell might have like a receptor. I don't know if we've talked about receptors, something like a lock on its surface, and then the hormone is like a key, where if that key comes and gets into that lock, then it opens it and then some kind of activity happens as a result. So the target cells have specific receptors for the respective hormones. It's almost like how we're talking about an enzyme activity, where an enzyme has an active site, but in this case, each hormone will bind to a particular kind of receptor. If you compare that to the effect that we have with our nervous system, where I touch something that is hot, I remove my hand right away. In terms of reaction, the response that is elicited or produced as a result of hormonal stimulation, it can take minutes, or it can take hours, weeks, or even months. So it's a hormonal communication. for the ladies, when you have your periods in a monthly period, it because of certain hormones get produced in your body, and your body does certain things for a certain amount of time. When you are growing up, when you're growing up about the age of 10, you are okay, and then at the age of 14 for boys, and then for females probably a little bit earlier, you want to see they start producing these hormones that the boys' voices starts getting deepened when they're getting to adolescence or puberty. All of those puberty features that are appearing because of these hormones. Do they happen at once in one day? No. Prolonged amount of time? Yes. So in terms of the hormones, you can classify them to an exocrine and endocrine hormones that are produced by exocrine and endocrine glands. What are exocrine glands? Exocrine glands are those that would secrete their products, their hormones, into ducts that would carry these hormones to other organs or outside of the body. Like, for example, you are very hungry, then if you like French fries, and then you smell French fries or you see French fries, out of a sudden you start drooling because saliva builds up in your mouth. Because the salivary glands we have salivary ducts that would pipe into your mouth the saliva that has been produced. So that's an example of an exocrine gland that produces something, and then it gets a duct that the thing lives through and goes into a particular area. The pancreas too is the same thing. They have a pancreatic duct that would live from the pancreas and take the pancreatic juice that has been produced into our duodenum. So, and then we talk about endocrine glands. I said these secrete their products directly into the bloodstream. Ducts to a location of tissue or cells. Endocrine glands secrete their products into the bloodstream that could be carried all over the body. And then you have, in terms of some of these glands, you could also classify them as paracrine. Paracrine action, where if they produce their hormones, they act just by diffusing into the neighboring cells or the neighboring tissue. And then autocrine action is when the hormone is produced by the same cell and then it acts on the same cell. Again, I said hormones by definition are chemical signals that promote communication between cells or body parts and even between individuals. We have prostaglandins, is a class of hormones that would affect neighboring cells and thus are not even carried into the bloodstream. Sometimes you would have a situation where you get inflammation, the inflammatory response that we are talking about, you get a bee sting, you got something like that, and then chemicals are produced to make the area there to get inflamed. And then pheromones, we don't know whether those exist between individuals that much as we see them between other animals, very pronounced like dogs. Pheromones are chemical signals that would influence the behavior of other individuals. For example, you go and buy some cologne or buy some perfume, you say they put on the perfume that if you wear this perfume or you wear this cologne, you are most likely to attract people more attracted to you or something like that. That means influencing the behavior of other people. Then if you look at the types of hormones that we're talking about, like peptide hormones, I said these bind to receptors on the plasma membranes. First of all, peptide hormones, a peptide bond is a bond that connects two amino acids together. So some hormones can be small pieces of amino acids connected together. Some of them could be actually big proteins, like insulin. And then some of them, the idea is that if you look at, because of the nature of our plasma membrane that has a lipid bilayer, the peptide hormones can only bind to the surface of cells or receptors on the surface of cells, and that binding on the surface of the cell causes some kind of a reaction to happen within the cell. Example is the growth hormone oxytocin are some of the examples that are peptide hormones that will bind on the surface of the cell and cause some activity to happen internally inside the cell. Meanwhile, steroid hormones are made up of lipids, and they can actually go through the cell membrane, and then they go and create activity inside of the cell. Estrogen, progesterone are examples of steroid hormones. So this is an illustration of both hormone types. So imagine that this hormone is carried, this peptide hormone is carried in the blood vessel. Now, this is a transmembrane protein that has a receptor site on this outside part of, this is the outside part. Imagine that this is a cell, just a portion of the cell. This is the lipid bilayer of making the cell membrane. This is a transmembrane protein, which is actually a receptor because it has this site here. And this is the peptide hormone. This hormone cannot pass through the membrane, the lipid bilayer cell membrane. It cannot come inside the cell. The only way for it to come is perform its function is when it gets out of the blood vessel, comes into the space next to the extracellular space, then it will bind. If it sees here, it binds and has a good fit in here. When it binds on this side of this protein, there's some kind of a conformational change that could cause some binding of another chemical here, and then will create a cascade of activity within the cell. Then compare that to this steroid hormone. It is able to pass through the plasma membrane because it's hydrophobic. The steroid hormone too is hydrophobic, so it can actually diffuse, come through the plasma membrane, and can even get into the nucleus, which is also have a lipid bilayer. This layer of the plasma membrane is the same like this one, can pass through pores here and go and cause activity to happen inside the cell or even inside the nucleus. In this case, for example, sometimes there might be some, this is our, imagine that this is our DNA on a chromosome. There might be some things that are blocking this side of the DNA, and let's say this was a gene that needed to be transcribed to cause transcription to happen. I think we have not talked about it yet, but to make this, to expose this gene to start making product, to start producing a message that could go produce other proteins, it would need something to come and knock this protein, this thing that was binding this part of the DNA here, this section. So a hormone can come through this way, get inside and bind to this one, then it falls off from here, exposing this side for that gene to be expressed. We'll talk about that. But the key points here is steroid hormones can get inside the cell, right? Or even sometimes inside the nucleus, and then cause activity to happen. Peptide hormones, on the other hand, cannot get in the cell to cause activity. For their own activity to be elicited, they have to bind to a receptor on the surface of the cell, and then that binding would create action into the inside of the cell. So hormones produced by glands, some glands producing their hormones into ducts, some glands producing their hormones into blood vessels, some hormones acting within the area where they are produced, some hormones being carried in blood to distant areas, some hormones produced by a cell, and then the hormones act on the cell that is produced. And again, these are the two methods generally that, some of these hormones can get into or could cause activity happen in the cell, either by binding on the surface, that is done by peptide hormones, or by getting into the cell, as we see with steroid hormones. Now, let's look at the glands that we have. This is a good picture to have, where you can actually just make a copy of this. If you already know this, fine, but if you don't know it, the best way for me, I try to remember stuff like this, is I make a copy of something like this and see whether I can create these boxes and fill the information back inside. So we have the glands that we have here that produce various hormones. Inside our brain, inside our head, in our brain, we have a pituitary gland here. This is almost like a master gland here, because it produces a whole bunch of hormones that influence a bunch of activities, as we're going to see. So it looks like a round, an oval structure, but there is a part that is in the front. They call it the anterior side, and the part that is in the back, they call it the posterior side, and each side producing different things. And then part above it is this structure called the hypothalamus. It would produce chemicals that would make this part to release stuff or to stop producing stuff. So I said the hypothalamus releasing and inhibiting hormones regulate the anterior pituitary. Chemicals go and cause this anterior to produce some other hormones. So a hormone from here goes and causes this one to produce another hormone. And this impact, they have two kinds of chemicals. The chemicals that would make this anterior to produce the hormone, or make it to stop, or other chemicals that would make it to stop producing the hormone. So it now begs the question, what does this anterior pituitary actually produce? So it produces hormones that will go and stimulate different organs. Like, for example, like TSH is thyroid stimulating hormone. So it goes and stimulates the thyroid to produce tyrosine. So where is the thyroid? It's right here. So it produces tyrosine and then triiodothyronine. They call it just in short T4 and T3. These both go to regulate a lot of activities. It's a metabolic rate, the rate at which reactions happen in our body. It regulates growth. And then it also produces calcitonin. Calcitonin, if the level of glucose, of calcium is too high in our blood, it reduces it. And then, as you're going to see, if the level is too high, a different hormone would go to deal with it. So when we're talking about here, this one here, when the level of calcium is too high in the blood, it lowers the level of calcium. What if the level of calcium is too low? Then these on this thyroid gland, there are certain small glands here called the parathyroids. They would produce the parathyroid hormone that would raise blood calcium level by removing it from things like sources like from our bones. Then the other thing that the anterior pituitary also produces is an hormone called adrenocorticotropic hormone. Wow. It's a long name. Sometimes they just say ACTH hormone. Where does it work? It goes and stimulates our adrenal glands. Okay, what are the adrenal glands? These are our kidneys right here. Above our kidneys are these two structures, adrenal glands. And then when we look at the inside, they have like an outer layer, a middle layer, and then a more central layer. So they influence a certain one of these layers. So, and then the next one is what? The gonadotropic hormones, follicle stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone. So they act on it in guys. It makes us to produce sperm and testosterone. In females, it makes them to produce milk. And then it also makes, produces again growth hormone. So which goes and makes our bones to grow and involves in stimulating cell division. So the anterior pituitary is actually almost like a stimulator that goes and says, you start doing this, you start doing this, you start producing this. It goes and produces a lot of stimulating hormones. Now, in terms of the adrenal glands, they produce all of this stuff. I said they have different sections. I think we'll just go into it to take a look at it. Then we have the thymus gland here. The thymus gland we had mentioned when we're talking about our immune system. We said some of our white blood cells called T lymphocytes. The T stands for where the lymphocytes went to mature. We know our white blood cells, same as the red blood cells, are produced by the red bone marrow. Some of the white blood cells will mature in the bone marrow. Meanwhile, some of the white blood cells that are produced would move to the thymus gland, where they go there and mature. And the maturation involves them being able to recognize your cells or my cells as belonging to me, so that they don't go and start trying to fight them. Then we have the pancreas that are here. We have cells there called the islets of Langerhans that produce insulin. When the blood sugar is too high, they make insulin to be produced by these cells to reduce them, to convert the blood insulin into glycogen to store it in the muscles or in the liver. When the glucose levels are very low in our blood, we sense it, and the pancreas produces glucagon, which will go to the areas of the stored glucose like glycogen, and you convert it back to glucose to bring the levels up. Then we talk about our gonads. Testes for guys, ovaries for females. The testes produce what? Like testosterone. And then in the ovaries, they produce estrogen and progesterone, all of which will influence our the gender characteristics. So this is a better illustration of the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland. So we kind of flipped it out. This is the anterior pituitary. This is the posterior. Posterior is back. This is the front, anterior pituitary. So this posterior pituitary, the hypothalamus produces some stuff. It comes here and makes this one to produce antidiuretic hormone that will go and control how much we pee. And then it also produces oxytocin that will causes uterine walls of the uterus to contract or causes females to produce milk. And then if the anterior pituitary, we said it produces a whole lot of stuff here, and then things that will work on the thyroids, the adrenal cortex, on our gonads, growth hormone, and again prolactin that will cause this to produce milk. The posterior antidiuretic hormone that comes from here that causes it to produce, it regulates again water balance, making the body, like in the kidneys, to be able to allow them to reabsorb water or let more water come in pee, but to regulate the amount of water we need. And then I cannot just section this out again, just what I said. Actually, I should also mention here, I mentioned that hormones produced by the anterior pituitary, see this one, a stimulating hormone that stimulates the thyroid. This one, adrenocorticotropic hormone that stimulates the adrenal cortex. We said the adrenal cortex was like, what is it? What is the picture here? I showed you the adrenal cortex somewhere. The adrenal cortex is the outside here of the cortex. I think there's a picture that shows it. But the point here is it produces this hormone that stimulates the adrenal cortex to produce what? Cortisol. Cortisol is a stress hormone, and when it produces it, it kind of affects your metabolism. Sometimes it makes you build it's almost like it's a stress hormone that when you're stressed, you produce this. And then we'll talk about the gonadotropic hormones, which we mentioned. The other one that we did not mention was melanocytes stimulating hormone that causes skin cells to produce melanin. So when our skin cells are producing melanin, it is because of the stimulation from this hormone that comes from the anterior pituitary. Then as I mentioned already, it produces the growth hormone that cause skeletal muscle and muscular growth. So the goal here is for you again to be able to identify the glands, identify the hormones they produce, the nature of the hormones, the impact of those hormones are. If you look at the growth hormone, sometimes people have a situation where their pituitary gland is producing a lot of growth hormone. And when you have too much growth hormone, it makes you grow faster and age faster. And sometimes you have too little growth hormone. If your parents, for example, are 6 foot tall, both your parents are, you would think that you might actually be able to have the gene to be able to grow to be 6 foot. But if something happens and it messes up, something is wrong with your pituitary gland that is not secreting enough growth hormone, you might end up not being able to grow as your parents. And the good thing about it is that if they can detect when you are growing, they usually measure some of these hormones when you go, they do a panel to understand the different amounts of these hormones as we grow. We know like what the baseline range is that we're supposed to have. So when you go give blood, they can check for this hormone and say, yeah, you're within the right range, or you're going too low here, or your cortisol level is too high because you're too stressed, or your growth is, this baby is supposed to be this big by now, but it is only like this. Maybe we need to look at their growth hormone amount that they are producing, and if they are not producing enough, they can actually start giving them, supplementing the hormone to be able to grow, enable them to grow accordingly. Because if you think about whether it is this growth hormone or some of these steroids, we can synthesize them now in the lab and give them to you to be able to give them to other people who need it, and is able to create the impact. Because remember, how do they work? They bind to stuff, they bind to receptors, and then trigger a cascade of activities that is required by the cell. So acromegaly, gigantism is when you have too much growth hormone is producing during childhood, and results usually when you're growing too fast, it can end up with poor health. And as an adult, if you have too much of it growing, you could have almost every part of your body being bigger, a bigger face, longer hands, longer legs, and everything. And most of these conditions usually lead in not in very good health outcomes. So somebody is having too much high amount of growth hormone. They start at 9-year-olds. They start looking aged quickly, and then at 52 years old, they look like as if they're 85 years old, something like that. Now I mentioned I will go now and now show like the thyroid gland. I said this gland is located below the larynx. For tyrosine, for it to work to produce tyrosine, it requires iodine. And where do you normally we need only very small amounts. I think when we're talking about food and about various amount, when you talk about the chemistry of life, I showed you a slide that had different kinds of elements, and saying that some of them will require very small amounts of them, but they're very essential for us. Iodine was one of them that we need very small quantity of it. Why? Because we need it to produce the thyroid hormone. If you cannot produce the hormone, it messes up the rate at which reactions happen in your body. If you don't have enough thyroid hormone, you can become very lethargic, almost like very sluggish, and then your metabolism is low. You get, if you get, you gain weight, and so many things that would happen as a result of that. But iodine is required. So where do we normally get it from? Sometimes you just eat, when you cook your food and use iodized salt, that is plenty enough for your body to use to be able to, to produce the hormone. And I said it also produces calcitonin, which help to make sure that the amount of calcium which is needed by our cells to do other things is just right. If we are having too much, because either from our diet, this calcitonin will make the calcium to be deposited in our bones. And then the parathyroid hormone, these other ones here, the parathyroid glands produce the parathyroid hormone, which will do the reverse, which if the blood calcium levels are low, they would make calcium to come out of our bones to bring up the level in our blood. Thyroid abnormalities. Sometimes you see people that have these swellings on their mouth, on their neck. This is the thyroid gland is supposed to be here. These swellings called it's a goiter. They have high, they call it exothalamic goiter. Sometimes when you are not producing enough thyroid hormone, then the gland grows bigger, thinking that it's going to grow bigger to be able to produce more, but the situation might be even more than that. So and if you have enough, maybe they are not having enough iodine, and then the cells start growing more, thinking that they're going to produce more. But in third world countries that usually don't have a way of accessing iodine, for example, you have these conditions very prevalent. So as a simple goiter, like show, is due to lack of iodine in the diet. Hypo is less, low blood levels of thyroid hormones. You could cause this congenital hypothyroidism or myxedemia. So you see, this is somebody that has a baby that is growing that has low amount of the thyroid hormone. They become blobby and swollen because the reactions are not happening properly, and the person becomes stocky. They might even have mental retardation. And then myxedema, I say, is hypothyroidism in adults characterized by weight gain, loss of hair, always feeling cold, and thick and puffy skin. Then the opposite of that is hyperthyroidism, when you are producing too much growth hormone. I have a friend whose thyroid gland was very big and they were producing too much growth hormone. One of the features that they will have is their eyes come out. When they open their eyes, the eyes up almost like they can jump, fall out. So I said they have a situation where they have protrusion of eyes, hyperactive, and suffer from, they cannot sleep well. And then sometimes if you have a tumor, which is a whole different story, like a cancer of the gland, it can cause you to produce more thyroid hormone. I talked about the parathyroid already. And then we're talking about the adrenal glands. I was looking at the slide. So I said, these glands are located above the kidneys, adjacent to the kidneys. That's why they add renal. Renal has to do with the kidneys. Then the add part means it's adjacent to the kidneys. If you look at the cross section of these glands, I said you'd have the cortex and the medulla, the inside part. I said there are two parts. The medulla controlled by a nervous system, epinephrine and norepinephrine to secrete. They are controlled by the nervous system, epinephrine and norepinephrine. Meanwhile, the cortex, this outside part, are controlled by this ACTH hormone that is produced by the anterior pituitary, and it controls our mineral content and then almost how much water we gain or lose. Again, narrating the whole thing. So when the adrenal glands don't work very well, you could have less secretion of these glucocorticoid hormones by the adrenal cortex, and then your skin will look as if you have some kind of a weird tan. If you normally have, if you are white, and then your skin color would look almost like bronze, like this. Addison's disease. Doesn't mean that this picture doesn't mean that only white people will have Addison disease. People of different complexions will also have the disease, but the manifestation, just for this picture, your skin will look something more like this. And then Cushing syndrome, again, I said this hypersecretion of glucocorticoid by the adrenal cortex, causing weight gain as compared to somebody who was normal. Now we go to the pancreas. The pancreas, we know, a fish-shaped structure organ that produces digestive juices, and then also acts as an endocrine gland because it has cells in there called islets of Langerhans that secrete hormones. So as an enzymatic producing gland, it produces juices that contain enzymes that will complete because it is connected to the duodenum. The pancreas is connected to the duodenum. So this is our stomach. When the food moves from our stomach, it curves like this into this curvature. This first part of the small intestine is called the duodenum. So the pancreas is connected to it, and then it continues as a small intestine. So the pancreatic juice would have things like trypsin, then have things like lipases that will go to complete the digestion of proteins and as well as fats respectively. And then meanwhile, in the hormonal part of it, these islets of Langerhans produce insulin and glucagon. Insulin's job is to lower the level of blood glucose. How does it lower it? It converts it into glycogen, where it is stored in the muscle and in the liver. What happens if those levels are low? When the levels of glucose are low, the stored glycogen in the muscles and in the liver is converted back to glucose, thanks to this other enzyme here called glucagon. We were talking about interoreceptors in the previous, talking about our senses. So there are interoreceptors that monitor the level of glucose in our blood that will tell and say, well, the levels are too low. And then it will kick in now and go and tell the pancreas to secrete this one. The pancreas will produce this one. Then it would start converting the glycogen into glucose. And then when the levels come just right, something goes back and tell them, now stop producing the glucagon. We already have enough. We are at the right level. Everything is good. And if you just drank like 1 liter of soda, your sugar level that contains much sugar, your sugar level will spike. Those interoreceptors again will pick that level of glucose high, that is high, and then they'll go to the pancreas and say, no, you need to secrete but insulin. It will secrete insulin, and then the insulin will manage those spikes in glucose. But there are issues. Sometimes, either because of genetic conditions or because we are surging too much on our sugar intake, this system that balances the blood glucose level might not be working very well, in which case the blood glucose level stays high, and that condition is called diabetes. There are two types again, type 1 and type 2. Type 1 is the one that you were born with it. Type 2 is the one that is because usually comes as a result of lifestyle. It is very prevalent. It's growing a lot in our country and in most developed countries. And some of the symptoms would include what? You have frequent urination, unusual hunger and thirst. Your vision becomes blurry. Your feet, when you have a sores on your feet, they heal very slowly, and you get very tired. Okay, if you think about it, frequent urination, why would you want to do that? When the kidneys are trying to filter stuff in that glomerulus thing that we're talking about, and that reabsorption that we're talking about, it's an opportunity to try to flush out some of the excess stuff that the body is seeing is too high. So some of the glucose would show up in your pee. And then you want to pee more to see your body's way of trying to say, guess what? I cannot manage this at the hormonal level, but I can help to pee some of it out. And then unusual hunger and thirst. When you are peeing out a lot, means that you are thirsty. You're losing water as a result. When you have unexplained change in weight, it can cause all of this. And the high blurry vision can also, that one is more complicated for us to be easy to be explained. And then it messes up with how blood is brought to your extremities. So you have a situation where your wounds or sores don't heal quickly. I said long-term effects of diabetes can be blindness, loss of limbs, nerve deterioration, kidney challenges, disease, or even cardiovascular diseases. I mentioned then when you had said type, these are the different types. Again, I put a table here that shows type 1. It's usually early onset. It could be an autoimmune disorder where your immune system is challenging those cells that produce the insulin or that are working in this process. I said pancreatic cells are attacked and cannot produce insulin by our own white blood cells. Remember, one of the things that we say when white blood cells do, the T lymphocytes do, is they go to the thymus gland to be able to recognize cells that are yours and not to attack them. So you can have a genetic condition that would make these cells, white blood cells, to not have enough training or to be able to recognize this person's individual cells, and then they start attacking their pancreatic cells that are supposed to be producing insulin, making them not to produce insulin. The good thing is We can make insulin now in the lab. You can have insulin injections to mediate to manage the situation. Type 2, we said usually is adult onset because it's when you're growing up, they control what you eat and all of that stuff. But when you are grown up, you could eat what you want and then you eat what you like, and then it might not be what you need. Then the condition could be that you have a sedentary lifestyle and then you just become obese. And when you take on too much sugar, then sometimes you overwhelm and then you cannot producing enough insulin, or sometimes the insulin that is produced is not responding properly to the receptors. So a whole bunch of situations can happen, but the net result is that your blood glucose level is always high. And so they have to find, depending on these conditions are things that can easily be diagnosed for one thing. And then they could actually go now to understand what somebody's situation is, and they can easily manage it. This one you can easily change with lifestyle, but this one is challenging. Then let's look at our gonads, like the testes for males. These produce androgens, or they call it, like for example, androgens is just a way for talking about hormones produced by the guys. So testosterone. What does testosterone do? It helps to, when you normally produce at puberty, all the male sexual characteristics, deep voice, facial hair, under armpit hair, vocal cords get larger and deeper, muscular strength, all of these are produced as a result of this one chemical. And what does this also mean? It means that if you take something that, if you remember, this one operates by having the molecule as a shape, it would bind to receptors and then drive, cause all these things to happen. So if you take an analog of this, something that looks like this, it can also go and create these effects, as we'll talk about in a little bit. For females, their ovaries, they produce estrogen and progesterone. Similarly, they also produce all those secondary female characteristics at puberty or sometimes during their menstrual period. Say it stimulates growth for the vagina as well as uterus, stimulates responsible for secondary sex characteristics as body hair fat distribution, breast development, and starting to produce eggs and the uterine cycle to get into gear. I mentioned the thymus gland. When you were dissecting the rat, I don't know whether you were able to see it. Rats have the thymus gland too. I'll say lies beneath the sternum. The sternum is this flat bone in front that is holding our ribs together, that our rib cage comes there together. I say it lies beneath the sternum. I say this gland is the largest and most active during childhood. So it's a gland that it looks big when you are growing up, and then it gets smaller when you get old. And you would think that it cannot make sense, because its job is to do what? Is to train white blood cells, because those T lymphocytes go and mature there. These white blood cells go and mature there. And those T lymphocytes are going to recognize what cells are ours and which ones will be foreign. When a baby is growing, many of their cells are growing, body parts are growing, generating more. So they need to be producing white blood cells that will go there and be recognizing all the growing features that are happening as the body grows. But when you become an adult, most of our body parts are already formed, and then most of our white blood cells they're being produced either to just replenish the existing ones or in response to some kind of immune situation. So the gland itself doesn't get a lot of work, and then it starts shrinking when we get older. And I said, it secretes hormones called thymosin that aid in the differentiation. When I say mature, a better way to describe how those cells get acquire the capability of recognizing self cells is, you can say, the differentiation of these lymphocytes, because growth can just mean getting bigger in size. Differentiation means the cells change in complexity of what they can do, as well as probably as they increase in number, they change in adjusting themselves to what they can do. Remember one thing: our cells have the same amount of DNA, the same DNA, except our red blood cells. But just the fact that you have all the DNA doesn't mean that the genes on those cells are being expressed. So in the T lymphocytes, when they go to the thymus gland, they go there and make sure that the peculiar genes are expressed so that those cells gain the capability of recognizing our own cells, not to reject them or to start fighting them. So we also have a gland in our brain called the pineal gland. It secretes melatonin. Melatonin is the one that tells us almost like, oh, it's getting dark, I'm feeling sleepy now, it's daylight, I'm going to wake up. And this is the one that actually determines or controls or regulates our circadian rhythm when we sleep and when we wake up. It may also regulate our own sexual development as well. When you have the problem that we go and say we have jet lag after you fly from one time zone to another time zone, like we live from here, you land into Europe, you live from here during the day, and in Europe, daylight here from where you came from is nighttime over there. When you go there, your body takes a certain amount of time to regulate the melatonin production to adjust to the day and waking time period of your new location. And during that interface period, what you experience is jet lag. So I said some hormones are also produced from other tissues, like we have the kidneys that produce erythropoietin. Erythropoietin, we know that it's the hormone that goes to make our red bone marrow to produce more red blood cells. And then leptin, which is produced by fat cells, it can act on the hypothalamus we're talking about to make you have the feeling of feeling full. Like if you eat like fatty stuff, and then the fat cells will secrete this stuff, and then it goes into your brain and say, oh, I've eaten enough, I don't want to eat again. I mentioned prostaglandins, that these are a group of chemicals or hormones that are produced that are not carried far away. They don't have to be carried in the bloodstream. They just act in neighboring cells. And some of them would make like our muscles, like our smooth muscle cells that we find in hollow organs like blood vessels or like in our digestive tract, or, to be able to regulate how they contract. And then, like, as they also impact reproductive organs, major roles in the body, like aspirin and ibuprofen, they block the production of these prostaglandins. Then I said, I put here like, if you look at it generally, the fact that we have a nervous system that enables us our body parts to communicate by sensing things and using neurons to directly communicate activity from one side to the other part for our brain to make sense of it and do something about it. And now we have the endocrine system that also helps. I can say, for example, if you're going to look like the communication, we can say, if you have those old phones where you have wires moving from one house to the next, where you could pick up the phone and then you make a phone call and then it goes through the wires to go reach to the next place, that you can call that like a nervous system. And then if you look at the Wi-Fi where you have the signal just bounces in the air and then goes and happens on the other side, you could look at that as almost like our endocrine system. So the hypothalamus again bridges the regulatory functions of both of these systems, because information like internal signals and external signals go to the hypothalamus. Then the hypothalamus will make a pituitary gland to produce these releasing hormones that will go and act on other systems. Again, this is the summary again of that has all the glands and what they do. And then I put this table here that tells you the gland, the hormone, whether it's a peptide or whether it is a steroid hormone, and what action it does. And then I think I also have a similar thing here to be able for you to be able to use as a reference. So if you print this one, like these 2 sheets here, or these 3 sheets here, and have them with you all the time for a few days, you should be able to remember most of these things. And because I don't know how else you would, but if any way that works for you, how will I be asking? What kind of questions will I be asking you? Since it is multiple choice, it's a good thing. I can give you the hormone and you tell me what gland produces it, or I can do the reverse, give you the gland and ask you what hormone it produces it, or I give you a function and then ask you which hormone is responsible for that function. But again, I said, if you look at it, our nervous system and our endocrine system working in concert with all the other systems in our body, they help to keep us healthy and keep us going well. Any question? I think this is the last one. Any question? Any question? Chance? Kathy? Flo? Ho? Mia? Any question? Tulam? I'm just calling the names on nice. See, look at the screen, no particular order. Emily, any question? Any questions? Okay, I'm going to stop here. Then look at, let's take a quick look at our muscular system, which I think you had access to the slides, but I don't think we talked about them. It's a very short one. Let's talk about it, and then we would be done for today before then we go to the lab. I'm going to share my screen as we talk about it. So when we're talking about the organization of our body, we talked about tissues and organ systems. I think we mentioned the muscles at some point. So what I would like you to know is the kinds of how we group the different types of muscles that we have, what muscles do, and how muscles are named. We'll focus a little bit about the skeletal muscle, and then we'll look at how muscles contract, and then we'll look at some disorders that are related to muscles and ways in which they are maintained, and how muscles helps in maintaining homeostasis for us. I said, in terms of function, our muscles help us to move around. They help us to be upright, maintain shape and posture. They help to circulate blood. When you don't walk, when we sit too long, as I make you sit, your circulation is not very good. Why? Because the skeletal muscles that press on your blood vessels are not contracting. When you move around, those skeletal muscles would press on the blood vessels and the veins to make the blood to come back to our heart. So sitting for too long is not a good idea. For respiration, they carry the herb we talked about, like how we breathe in air and out air. We have the muscles, our intercostal muscles contracting to be able to make us to breathe in. And then for digestion, we have our muscles that make us our stomachs churn the food to make and then help it move by peristalsis from one section of our digestive tract to the other. For urination, when you go to pee, you have compression of your bladder, and then for you to be able to be for childbirth, contraction, we have this muscle, the uterine walls is contracting. For vision, you can squint to see. For organ protection, we have muscles that shield the inside parts of our body to make sure that everything is okay. But now let's review the three kinds of muscles, types of muscles, if we're going to group them. You have smooth muscles. When you say smooth muscles, sometimes we'll make like they should be rough muscles. No. Smooth muscles are muscles that, if you look in terms of shape, they're almost like spindle-shaped at their ends. These are smooth muscles. So in characteristic, they have like one nucleus. They are tapered at both ends. So here there are four different muscles right here, four smooth muscle cells. They have one nucleus, and they are tapered at the ends. Where do we normally find them? We find them normally in hollow organs. That means organs that have like a hole inside. Like, for example, our digestive tract has a hole inside. So the walls that make up our digestive tract have smooth muscles. Our blood vessels, well, it's a vessel because it's like a pipe. Blood flows through it. So the walls of the blood vessels have smooth muscles. So they call those vascular smooth muscle cells. So characteristically is that they are uninucleated. They have one nucleus per cell. They are tapered. They are cylindrical. And what makes them to contract is, we call it involuntary, because we don't decide when our blood vessels contract or when after we have swallowed your food. You don't control whether it moves from your stomach, now goes to the small intestine, from the small intestine it goes to the large intestine. You don't do that. There is direct communication between the walls and your brain that sense, okay, it is now time to move the food from your stomach to this duodenum. They send contraction, and then peristalsis happens and pushes the food into that section. So their contraction or their activity is involuntary or is autonomous control. And then the next one that we want to look at is the cardiac muscle. So these are muscles that make up the heart. So unlike the or similar to the smooth muscles, yeah, they have one nucleus per cell, but different from the smooth muscle cell is that the cells are sometimes branched. Look at this cell here is branched. This one branches here, this one branches here, but they have one nucleus per cell. Then the other thing that they also have that is different from this smooth muscle is that they have striations. They have marks there. That means they appear to have like dark and light bands, which we'll talk about later. What is causing those striations? And then one of the other things that they also have in common with this one is that their activity is not under voluntary control. You don't decide how fast your heart beats. but their body sense a need for it to beat faster, either because of a deficiency of oxygen or because you need more circulation. After running, it starts beating, the brain sends signal for it to start beating faster. Then you have the skeletal muscles, which are way, way more different than the smooth muscle. More similarity to the cardiac muscles in what? In that they have striations, just like the cardiac muscles. But they are kind of a little bit weird because they are longer. They are more. They are tubular. That means they are slightly like a cylinder longer. But the other thing that they have is that they have this nuclei. One cell can have many nuclei. So they say they are multi-nucleated fibers. But similar to this is they have striations, the dark and the light bands. As you're going to see, it is because of different kinds of protein fibers that are present in these muscle cells that make them have these striations. Unlike these both, their action is voluntary. Examples, skeletal muscles, they call them skeletal muscles. Why? Because they are attached by tendons to the skeleton. Their action is voluntary. I want to drink my coffee. I voluntarily extend my arm, causing my biceps to relax. Then I make them to contract. I bring it up. I take a sip of my coffee. So the action is voluntary. Now, in talking about muscles, I would like us to look at certain properties of muscles. They can be excited and they can be irritable. You can make them to contract, you can make them to extend. That means they can stretch and come back, so they're elastic. And then they can adapt when you do too much activity for a certain time, they get used to stretching in that range, and then so they're adaptable. So I went here now, all of those things that I told you was talking about the different characteristics of these various functions. Like let's take skeletal muscles, for example. I said they support our body, they allow for movement attaching to the skeleton, they help us maintain body temperature. How do they help us maintain body temperature? If it is cold, the more activity we do, walk around, the more our body stays warm. And one thing that I should also mention is that they have a bunch of mitochondria. Mitochondria is that energy, it's almost like the energy powerhouse of the cell where cellular respiration happens. They have a lot of mitochondria, so they could break down glucose to be able to generate ATP. I said they assist in movement in the cardiovascular and lymphatic system, because again, in the cardiovascular system, they would squeeze on veins to make blood to return back to the heart. The lymphatic system, to again, depends on them because it also depends on the muscles pressing on them. And since they have valves to push the lymph liquid inside the lymphatic system to move from one section to the other. I said they protect internal organs and stabilize our joints, and they are connected to the skeleton by tendons. So they usually have, this is like a skeletal muscle, a tendon that connects it to the skeleton. So some of them act in where this one is, they're acting in pairs where in an opposite direction, when this one is contracting, this one is relaxing, and vice versa. Then they talk about like the point at which the attachment happens, like the insertion. So these are antagonistic muscles, for example. And then sometimes we name the muscles based on how their size or their shape. See, like this one, the size of this one, our biggest muscle is our butt, the one that exist in our butts. They call it the gluteus maximus. They can based on shape. Some of them are like a delta sign, like say deltoid, triangular shaped, or some of them based on their location, say frontalis or direction. They said the rectus abdominis means straight, and then attachment, brachia, they call it brachioidealis. All of these things, when you take anatomy and physiology, or you're taking a kinesiology class section, you will go into this a lot more. Then I put here, if you are taking this slide, don't worry about this, it's just to tell you that you would, if you're taking anatomy and physiology, you would know all of these ones. See the human system here. You could look, it summarizes here again. You could tell you now, if you take one of these skeletal muscles, as we're going to look at it and look at a skeletal muscle cell, how it appears, and what accounts for the light and the dark bands that we see. So if you look here, the muscle cell, instead of saying the muscle cell, we'll call it like a muscle fiber. They have similar names to what we see, like a cell membrane, a plasma membrane. So we call it, we would say a plasma membrane is called the sarcolemma. And then we will say the smooth endoplasmic reticulum, we'll say the sarcoplasmic reticulum, and then so we have areas that also, and it also has a function that it stores calcium. And then you hear other terminologies will say a muscle fiber are arranged in bundles. For some weird reason, I look at the muscle, you know how like a packet of cigarette looks like? So a muscle fiber, I say muscle fibers are arranged in bundles. So imagine like you have a packet of cigarette, instead of being in a rectangular packet, it's in a round packet. No, but it's almost like a spaghetti. When you buy spaghetti in a plastic bag, you have all of these strands inside. So one bundle of spaghetti is almost like a muscle, a fascicle or something like that. So you have these different fibers that are present inside. And then within each muscle fiber, you have myofilaments present inside. So they are these filaments, and so it looks like you would have this big bundle. So you started from this one, a muscle. Now you take this muscle fiber. Now you have this myofiber. You blow it up, this section now becomes this section. This projection now becomes this one. And then you see all of it. Now when you look at a section that has dark bands and light bands, they are called, so you will see here there is a particular section here that has some like zigzag, they call it the Z line, and the Z line here. Now, if you look at it under the microscope, they blow it up, it looks something like this. So what are all of this? What's all of this stuff? If you go here on this picture, there are two kinds of proteins here. These ones are actin filaments, and these have made of myosin. So these ones here are attached, these actin filaments are attached to this thing here called the Z line, and the actin filaments on this side is called the Z line. This section here from this Z line to this one is called a sarcomere. So one myofiber has many sarcomere sections on it. And from one Z line to the other has this actin filaments. These myosin filaments are larger. They are larger. So sometimes when the muscle is at rest, you will see this gap more visible. When the muscle contracts, you have a situation where these actin filaments come closer together. They almost like you. If you see my fingers, if you imagine like this band looks something like this, and then when it contracts, they shorten it, they pull inside, they lock it so that this dark area, this area here is closed. So I think I can play this. Hopefully it works. Calcium ion regulation. Let's see how I can see whether this works. Sliding model. Let's see if this works to illustrate how contraction happens to account for it. Let's see. Give me a thumbs up if you can hear.
Muscle contractions are controlled.
Can you hear? Perfect.
By the actions of calcium. The thin actin filaments are associated with regulatory proteins called troponin and tropomyosin. When a muscle is relaxed, tropomyosin blocks the cross-bridge binding sites on actin. When calcium ion levels are high enough and ATP is present, calcium ions bind to the troponin, which displaces tropomyosin, exposing the myosin binding sites on actin. This allows myosin to attach to a binding site on actin, forming a cross bridge. Calcium ions are stored in the sarcoplasmic reticulum and are released in response to signals from the nervous system to contract. Neurotransmitter molecules are released from a neuron and bind to receptors, which depolarizes the membrane of the muscle fiber. The electrical impulse travels down the T tubules and opens calcium stores. Calcium ions flow to the myofibrils, where they trigger a muscle contraction.
So to the point here, what do? I stop sharing. Let me share again. Sorry. I was trying to close this.
Muscle contractions are controlled by the actions of calcium.
Hold on one second. I hope I close this. It doesn't close up out. Okay, perfect. So if you look at these fibers, right, this myosin here has areas on this actin where you can grab it. So if you look, this one is like an actin fiber. This one is this one. So it has this protein that makes hides on this. When it is this protein that is called troponin, is when it is bind, it blocks the area where this myosin can attach to it. But if you stimulate, you can, if let's say I want to do something, my nerve cells would go at the point at which they go to the muscle, they would cause calcium to be released from the storage area, the sarcoplasm. When there's amount of calcium in here, calcium will come and bind to this stuff, to this troponin, and when they bind to it, it's almost like it unravels it such to expose the binding sites second, guys. I do this will kick me out, right? Okay. So when it exposes this binding sites for this myosin, the filaments, these filaments here go and attach to this and pull. It's almost like how you pull a rope like that. And that is how, when it pulls it, it narrows this gap here and brings this one closer. This one pulls it and brings this one closer. This one pulls this one and brings this one closer. So you have this gap that used to be the light gap that was here, it gets darker. And then when it relaxes, it goes back, it restores to its original position. So calcium is involved. So when you see why, for example, to carry out activity like this requires calcium. Calcium is required to make our bones strong. Calcium is allowed to be able to make like muscle contraction to happen. Calcium is allowed to be able to make neurotransmission to happen. Calcium is very important for us in our diet, and all of this also requires ATP. What do I expect you to remember here? The visual, I think there is a visual that I have somewhere that shows you how this relaxation and contraction happens. I want you to maintain that visual, but I would like you to remember what a muscle fiber looks like, a myofibril looks like, the components, the myosin and the actin that make it up, and how the muscle contracts. So let me see whether this one will give you the actual thing that I wanted you to see. It's not working. Okay, I don't know why this one is not working, but that's fine. There's another one that will show you what happens. I think I have the slide somewhere for you, the activity for you to see. So all what I just told you is all narrated here. I say what role does ATP play in muscle contraction and mortis rigor? So ATP is required in this process of after the calcium ions have exposed the binding sites for those myosin to be able to attach there. That information, that amount of time when the ATP stops being produced to allow this activity of binding to move the muscle to contract happens. Sometimes in a reverse way, they can use to actually, if there's a situation where they're doing some forensic work, they could determine how much, you know that ATP gets produced in two ways, by cellular respiration and also by fermentation. When your muscles stop having oxygen, either somebody dies and then their muscles stop receiving oxygen, there's a duration of time where they can still have muscle activity, and then it keeps moving. They still have contraction because through fermentation process that does not involve cellular respiration that produces ATP, but in small quantities. So they can use that time backwards to be able to estimate when somebody died. And then in terms of contraction, they have certain ways, terms that they use to describe how the muscle fiber, they say a motor unit, a nerve fiber and all the muscles fibers it stimulates, a muscle twitch, a single contraction that lasts a fraction, or a summation, an increase of muscle contraction until it gets maximally sustained, and then tetanus, maximal sustained contraction tone. When you are doing all of those kinesiology and all of this and things, you will encounter these terms more. But of interest, I think it might be, is how when you know how you say, I'm going to exercise so that I can lose weight. So I put here what happens, like the source of energy to drive muscle contraction. How do you exercise to the point at which you start losing weight? So let's take a peek at this. I said, where, first of all, energy is stored, you could store energy like glycogen, or you could store it as fat. So in the blood, you have glucose. In the fats, you can have fatty acids, also in blood. So you have a source of muscle energy, a source of more readily available is glucose and fats that is found in the blood. So the whole deal is, you will need to, if you are exercising, you need to remove the amount of use up the amount of existing glucose in the blood, and then the fatty acids, and then when you are getting low, the first immediate source to replenish them would be the glycogen first from the stored one in the muscle to increase it in the blood, and the breakdown of this one to bring it into the blood. So if you look here, like for the first hour, for example, they kind of estimate here, said muscle triglycerides is at this level, plasma fatty acids. So this is this one in the muscle. This one, fatty acids. Fatty acids in the plasma. Plasma is what is the liquid part of blood. That is what we find in the fatty acids in it. And then if you look at this one, this is blood level glucose. And then this one is the amount of muscle glycogen. First hour, you see this situation. Second hour, because this one is being replenished, this one is being broken down to add more of this. So you see this one start increasing, this one start increasing. And then you could see over time, after about a period of 3 hours, look at this one. These are the muscle triglycerides. So you need, for you to able to have amount of fats that is found close within your muscles, for you to start reducing it, you need a sustained, this is the blue one here, shows how much fat you need to, if you want to look at the fats that you need to reduce from that are associated with your muscles, you need to exercise for a very long time to start creating a dent for them to reduce. So the thing about put at this slide is that if you have a choice of, okay, I'm going to eat the extra 2 cookies, and then I'll go and work it out. If you calculate the amount of fat that is present in those extra 2 cookies that it will contribute, and how long it would take for you to burn it to make a significant thing, or you need an excessively long amount of time to be able to burn it up. So if you are making the rationale, I'm going to eat this, I'm going to go work out to burn it up, just imagine and find there are more illustrations that would inform how long it takes for you to burn the calories either that are present in fat that you just ate, and how long, whether you are eating it from carbohydrates or from fats, and how long it will take for you to be able to burn them, if that's your objective. Sources of ATP. We said this contraction of the muscles requires ATP, which is the currency of energy that the cell uses. For fast activity, for example, if you throw me a ball and I want to reach out to catch it, or if I just want to throw a ball, all those fast things that happen in seconds, there's creatine phosphate that is normally stored in our muscle that would usually break down to release this ATP. But sometimes you need more energy than even your cellular respiration can produce to do something. So, for example, you have not been active, and then out of a sudden you start being active, quickly start doing some fast activity. Sometimes there's not enough glucose that goes to your mitochondria to be able to allow cellular respiration to generate the ATP for you to use. So sometimes you have a situation of fermentation, meaning that you have anaerobic production of ATP only when glycolysis is happening, and a small amount is produced. And you are hoping that during this period, you want to make sure that oxygen is brought to that tissue, to that muscle, or else you will have a muscle cramp in that area because of lactic acid buildup. But for longer term production of energy, you depend on the mitochondria to cellular respiration to produce that. So ATP for muscle contraction. Creatine phosphate, the fastest, does not require oxygen. Glycogen to lactate, that means just going from this to produce lactic acid through fermentation, a small amount of ATP is produced. It doesn't, both of these do not require oxygen, and they happen relatively faster. This one being the fastest, next by this one. This one is much slower, requires oxygen, and produces, operates in the mitochondria and produces the maximum amount of ATP. Talking about fat distribution, you talk about brown fat as well as for fast twitch, those ones that use creatine phosphate, and then the all sustain ones that require aerobic, would require aerobic respiration to generate ATP for you to use for that effort. In talking about muscles, I think it is just befitting to talk about exercise. We said when we exercise, we improve on our circulation, we make our muscles to build a lot of strength and endurance, and they make them more flexible. For our cardio process, as we breathe more, we make more oxygen, we breathe in more oxygen, blood increases blood flow to areas, which takes more oxygen to various areas, which is a good thing. I said, high density lipoprotein levels increase. So what is high density lipoprotein? So this is a protein that carries cholesterol. They have low density lipoproteins called LDLs and HDL, which are high density lipoproteins. The more of this kind of protein carriers, cholesterol carriers, the HDLs you have, the better you are, because you are actually having less cholesterol. It's almost like you can say the HDLs are like a Ford 150 that with carrying space at the back. Then the LDLs are like a semi that can carry a whole bunch of stuff compared to the carrying space of a Ford 150. This one carries less cholesterol if you have more of them. The other one, LDLs, have the capacity to carry more cholesterol. So when they are measuring your cholesterol levels, they're not measuring the cholesterol directly, they're measuring it indirectly by the amount of these carriers, whether you have this kind of cholesterol carriers more, or whether you have the LDL carriers, more of them in your blood. I said, the more we exercise, again, the proportion of protein to fat increases favorably, meaning that you have more protein than fat. I said, benefits of exercise, again, it may prove we don't really understand very well, but we know that there's a correlation between people who exercise more and less cancers of this type, whether colon, breast, cervical, uterine, or even ovarian cancers. We also know that when you exercise, yes, your muscles are involved. Yes, your bones too. It involves a lot of bone rebuilding, and then thus increasing or reducing your chances of having osteoporosis. And when you exercise, you feel good and you're not depressed. There are some common disorders that people have because of that are related to muscles. Sometimes you have spasms, which can be like attacks from tardive dyskinesia, like a genetic disorder, where you have sudden involuntary movements. You can have seizures where you have like multiple spasms all over your body, which makes your body shake, of the skeletal muscles, like they start contracting in an uncontrollable manner. And then you could have muscle cramps. When you're away, for example, you have a situation where you have this anaerobic respiration of a buildup of lactic acid, and then your muscles trying to react so that it can bring more blood flow to the area. And certain situation, you can have stretching or tearing of the muscle due to some kind of strenuous activity. Or you could have a muscle sprain, where your joint twist, and the twisting involves the muscles and the tendons and the ligaments and the blood vessels that are associated with it. Now, some other muscle diseases, they say fibromyalgia, We have achy muscles. They're cause they don't really understand. Muscular dystrophy is another one. It's a genetic disorder, means it's inherited. After a while, for some reason, your muscle starts, they said they degenerate. The connection between your nervous system and your muscle starts breaking down, and the muscles don't, you cannot control, you cannot control them to contract, and they are skeletal muscles which we are supposed to be able to voluntarily, make them to contract and relax, but we lost that connection. Then myasthenia gravis, say autoimmune disorder that attacks the receptors for this neurotransmitter called acetylcholine. So if that receptor is there, that is supposed to be on your muscle, so that when your nerve cell goes and produces this neurotransmitter, it binds to that receptor and then makes your muscles to contract. When you have this condition, you have your white blood cells go and attack the receptor, so that, well, nerve impulses will send a signal to the muscle, and they will when they get closer to the muscle, they will release that neurotransmitter, which is acetylcholine. And then, but it goes now, there's nothing to bind to it, so the muscles doesn't recognize the signal, because that binding would make the muscles start contracting. When that neurotransmitter comes there, there's nothing to bind on, so that communication is not effective. Then amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, commonly known as Lou Gehrig's disease, I say in which motor neurons degenerate. So this time it is not the receptors breaking down, but it is the neurons that are carrying messages to the muscles. They break down, and your brain would understand something and said, okay, I want you to make a command to pick this thing. But the muscles, the motor neurons that are supposed to take this information to the muscle, they themselves degenerate. Both this one and this one have a genetic origin or inheritance pattern, and some of them we don't really understand how to deal with them. I said the skeletal muscles and the system, I said both systems involve movement that allows us to respond to stimuli, digestion of food, return blood to the heart, and moving air in and out of our lungs. They protect our body parts again, and then the bones store and release calcium needed for the muscles for us to contract. So remember again, we're talking about, in the previous slide, I was talking about the motor neuron bringing the information to the muscles to making it to contract. In one condition, the receptors, when the information comes through an action potential in the motor neuron, in that place where the neuron ends next to the muscle, calcium is required to be released to make the neurotransmitter acetyl-CoA to be produced that will bind to those receptors. And when it binds to those receptors inside the muscle, it would cause calcium to leave from those storage areas to go attached to that troponin to make sure that those fibers are available for binding to happen and cause contraction to happen. So you could see the implication of calcium in this stuff. I said blood cells that are produced in the bone marrow, and then our muscles self-maintain body temperature. When we are cold, we shiver and so generate heat. So our muscular system is very integral in working along with all our other systems. Now, in terms of talking about muscles, I think it's also befitting to talk about anabolic steroids. We know anabolic steroids are analogs. Analogs means lookalikes of steroids that are made that normally would go to increase protein production. People, when you build muscle, you have actin filaments are protein. Myosin are different kinds of protein. So people take these steroids to build more muscles. But the most common effect of taking these anabolic steroids that you buy from the store or someplace is that you can develop high blood pressure, you could develop jaundice in your eyes, acne, and they'll also increase your chances of having cancer. People who do use these steroids to grow bigger muscles, there's also a price sometimes they pay, in the sense that it can cause a shrinkage of their testicles if they're guys, or it could cause impotence. And it also can make you change your mood, and sometimes mood swings from very happy to very mad and become very aggressive. And then sometimes you would look at, yeah, you can appear to be very buffed up, but you can also have this potential for this, having these issues, or worse, or I don't know whether it's worse, but you'd be impotent. And then you ask, is this, having all of this and then exposing yourself to all of this, is this really worth it? And then sometimes the unfortunate thing is, it is legal to buy some of these drugs. You can buy them, but you can use them at your own peril as well. But if you're participating in sports, they usually screen for people. The reason they screen for people who, whether you have any steroids in your blood before you go for a competition or an event, is because they're trying to discourage people from using it. Well, that's all what I have here.